In 1190, during the Crusades of the Holy Lands, a group of German knights created an organization called the Teutonic Order. Despite enjoying the plunders of war and conquest, the ultimate ambition of the order was to create its own state. After a failed attempt in Hungary, which resulted in their exile in 1225, the knights made yet another attempt in Prussian and Polish lands in 1228. Their official assignment was to Christianize the pagans living in there. To do so, the knights led a cruel and devastating religious war. Those who resisted were murdered, and their families forced into slavery. This was all done with the willing consent and knowledge of the Pope and the Emperor himself. At the age of 15, I became a victim of the Order's quest for a sovereign nation. I was taken away and sent to Magdeburg, where I was forced to convert and publicly baptize for the sake of their propaganda. Over the following years, I took lessons in Latin, German, and in the art of warfare. I became acquainted with the rules of the Order and was brought up as a follower of Catholicism and a devotee to God. During training, it became clear I had a talent for battle, though this talent would soon become my curse. The knights, having noticed my prowess for combat, ordered me to conquer all of Prussia. Madness, I thought. Yet as a Prussian nobleman, I knew the language of the people, and already had their trust. But at the time, I didn't know the knights would eventually ask me to betray my kinsmen. My journey began when I was called to meet the eminent knight brother Konrad von Tierberg. He had sought me out for my guidance in order to resolve a conflict with one of their more stubborn Prussian tribes. My tribe. My own. For the first time, I saw the cruelty of the Order with my own eyes. I confused how the Pope could be so silent towards their crimes. Then I realized it wasn't a matter of faith or belief, but of privilege and power. With my realization came the will to break my shackles. I cast off my knight's mantle and renounced the faith forced upon me. Soon I stood with my tribesmen side by side against the knights. The years spent fighting alongside the Knight Brothers taught me all of their techniques and strategies. I was acquainted with their tactics, and I knew how to use their weaknesses against them. In 1263, on the fields of Lubava, we were about to strike at the Order with all our strength. We thought cutting off the head of the Order would destroy them for good. But after Helmerich von Rechenberg's death, the Order pulled all its diplomatic strings. Having convinced the Pope to allow the Order to accept lowlifes and criminals amongst their ranks, the brothers began drafting bandits from all around Europe, offering absolution, and more importantly, gold. Unaware of the impending danger, we decided to split our forces, focusing on strategic points crucial to the Order. Link, the leader of the Bart and Pogazon tribes, targeted Christburg, the mightiest of the Order's strongholds. But by then, my kinsmen were not aware that all of Europe, united by faith and gold, had decided to stand against them. The Teutonic Order was victorious. However, the support of the Pope came with a catch. After our defeat, the knights were ordered to begin a crusade against the Prussian tribes. We fought the knights in a war of attrition. Yet as we cut off one head, 3 others seemed to take its place. Exhausted and with our ranks broken, we hid in the forests, planning our next offensive. But the Knights of the Order struck first. Learning from our strategies, they attacked us with all their forces in the very place we least expected them. I, Hercus Monte, leader of the Prussian uprising, admit that I was wrong. I do not doubt that I once held Prussia's very future in my hands. I underestimated our enemy and failed in the final test. Rotting in the Order's cell, I could do nothing to prevent the outcome of the final battle. I knew my tribesmen would never hand over their weapons without a fight, but we could not stop the unrelenting march of the knights as they captured every city, every gourd, and every inch of our lands. Their final destination was Litzbark, home of the largest standing Prussian military force still fighting in the uprising. But not for long. As soon as the Order defeats them, the insurrection is over. I was told my fellow tribesmen of Litzbark fought well, but such things only matter for those who still hold honor in high regard. We were worn down by the Order, unable to regroup and strike back. We flexed our muscles until they were sore, but the Knights' reinforcements were never-ending. The harsh truth is that every unsuccessful revolution brings not only death to its apologists, but to the common people as well. It was no different with the Order. As soon as they established authority over us, they began to displace my fellow Prussians. With our houses burnt, children and women taken as slaves, we lost what was most important to us: our home. And with my death dies the testimony of our people. No one will hear me out. No one will lend me their ear. Just as history as written by the victors, the defeated are cast away into the darkness of yesterday.
The life of Frederick II to this day is considered scandalous and unorthodox. His unyielding temperament and lifetime struggle with papal power led to numerous brawls within the country, granting him the nickname of an Antichrist. Ironically, despite being excommunicated fourfold, skeptic King Frederick II met his death peacefully among the habits of Cistercian monks in 1250, what forever ended the line of the House of Hohenstaufen. The king's death threw the country into a stupor, universally called the Great Interregnum, the time when no king could achieve enough recognition to consolidate the country's holdings under one ruler, leaving Germany in a state of permanent civil war for almost 20 years. The tide of this 20-year-old dismay changed when the biggest beneficiary of Germany's disorder, Count Rudolf von Habsburg, used his wealth and connections with the abbots to make himself a firm candidate for the kingship. To seal his coronation, Rudolf promised the renunciation of the imperial rights to the Pope and promised a new crusade to Pope Gregory X, a former adversary of Frederick II. As a result, Rudolf I of Germany was crowned in Aachen Cathedral on the cold day of the 24th of October, 1273. However, another candidate for the throne, Ottokar II of Bohemia, never acknowledged Rudolf's election. When the new king decreed all lands lost after Frederick II's death to be returned to the crown, depriving Ottokar of vast parts of his land, it became the last straw. The good people of Germany were about to be thrown into yet another war. But whilst Ottokar II was preparing for the clash, the crown had to deal with a much more pressing matter. The first edict of the new king was to wage war against the robber barons, whose activities exploded in the wake of imperial authority during the Great Interregnum, and who committed numerous crimes against the crown, such as stealing ships or kidnapping. If Rudolf I wanted to stand against Ottokar II, he had to deal with the barons first. The bodies of Rudolf's adversaries bled out on the floor, making the red carpet he desired, the Raubritter's heads were speared up, creating a morbid admonition. Whoever stands against the crown will live with an axe over his neck, because some people understand only violence, and the only way to impose rule is a power play. Once the robber barons were removed, Rudolf I focused on the imminent threat brewing abroad. He called Ottokar II to renounce the territory of Austria, which rightfully belongs to the crown. After the Bohemian king refused, Rudolf outlawed him and sent me, Meinhard, Count of Tyrol, to deal with the matter. In 1276, I arrived in Styria to lead the first offensive on Ottokar's forces. The triumphant soldiers thrusted their swords into the earth, marking the land for the king. We made sure the soil was welcoming for our brethren. We did not cry for the fallen, as we are a generation of warriors. Our armor will never get the chance to rust, and our swords will never lose their edge. I do not think we are fighting for ourselves anymore, but for what's next to come, for those whose armor can and will rust. The country was still a boiling pot. As we were propagating the king's word with the help of our trusted swords and lances, Rudolf made friends among vassals and abbots, making sure our politics didn't come down to fists and steel. Ottokar's forces tucked their tails behind them and retreated to Vienna. The word is, Rudolf is heading that way as well. We move forward shortly to join his army. Ottokar's face was that of a madman. A man whose ego outgrew itself, and whose inner whispers became louder than his thoughts. But failure feeds on madness, and in the end, Vienna was ours. The news claimed that Rudolf forced Ottokar to accept him as the new ruler in Germany. However, despite his surrender, Ottokar never stopped plotting against Rudolf, taking Rudolf's attitude as a sign of weakness. He bought himself enough time to find new allies in Silesia, and waged war not only on Germany, but on Hungary too. The newly emancipated Austrian knighthood was deeply divided, with some supporting Ottokar and the other fighting under Rudolf's banner. In addition, Rudolf made a treaty with the Hungarian king Ladislaus IV, and when Ottokar laid siege to the town of Trosendorf, Rudolf's plan was to cut off his supplies and face the knights that rebelled against the king. Time for negotiation was over, and the renegade knights would have to pay for their betrayal in flesh and blood. As a soldier, you learn when the time is right for prayer and amendments. You feel it in the wind and in your bones. The birds sing a different song. Even I crossed my hands in prayer for the very first time in the last few years and ordered my armor to be squeaky clean. No soldier wants St. Peter's hands to get greasy by the mud on his shield. On the 26th of August, 1278, we set off for Deutsche, where the fate of the soldier's generation was about to be sealed. Rudolf boldly decided to face Ottokar's army in the open-pitch battle of Morava Basin, where his freshly made peace with Ladislaus IV would be tested. However, Ottokar's forces were conjoined with Silesian units. At this moment, I think we were all aware of the significance of that battle. Each of us questioned Rudolf's leadership at least once. We were tired of all this rousting, but our doubts were dispelled the moment he took control of the cavalry. His daring strike shattered Ottokar's forces with surgical precision, forcing him to retreat. We chased Ottokar to his last breath, and when his armor was worn with dirt and blood, we struck hard. Rudolf tried continuing his expanse further into Czech territory, but was met with an overwhelming defiance. Eventually, he surmised that the best means to end the conflict was infatuation. He gave the hand of his daughter Jutta to Václav, Ottokar's successor. Both rulers administered their crowns greatly, aware that steady economic growth can only be achieved with stability and protection. They created one of the most influential and powerful dynasties in the world. The time of soldiers came to an end, so I stowed my armor and let it rust. Can't say it was easy to adapt to the new way things were, but I must admit, living outside of a thunderstorm has its bright sides.